morning, everyone.
You guys got me in the center.
So, as Dario said, there's a crisis in trust in messaging. And for example, we know that internationally, around 90% of HTTP traffic is OTT, one-time passwords, right? Around 10% of that's domestic, so overall, roughly 30% of one-time password traffic is, or A2P traffic is one-time passwords. So, and we're seeing more and more brands moving away from using SMS as a way to send one-time passwords to using other channels like flash calling or passkeys, or as Meta would know, WhatsApp. And we're looking at how do we address this crisis in trust, and that's what this panel is about today. I'd like to start the first question with Push. Push, you represent one of the biggest enterprises that sends OTTs. Oh, I'm sorry, one-time passwords. Too many abbreviations. I'd like to ask you, and of course Meta owns WhatsApp. I'd like to ask you, what for you are your top 2 or 3 concerns these days around SMS and bringing that trust back?
I think, see, SMS is a great way to authenticate the user. People have been using it for years. It's simple. It's been used. If you ask me, like, 2 bigger concerns, I think, is the long-term price viability of it. You can't be waking up every morning with the price increase and stuff. And what has largely been happening over the last couple of years is a lot of fraudulent traffic, and I would like to call it AI with T. And I think that's what's happening, and that's really concerning us, right? Like, and it's just not about us. I think it's about the ecosystem. It's about the consumers. Like, it's just like removing the trust from a channel like which we've used for like 15, 20 years. So yeah, surprising and fraudulent messages, spams, and all that. I think that's not doing any justice to the channel, which is easy to use, works on all types of phones and stuff. So yeah, that's where we largely land up. But those are the 2 concerns which is giving us a little bit of a sleepless night at this point of time.
Right. And that kind of resonates with what we're hearing from our members. And Ellie, I think maybe we can give the people here a bit of a background on what we've been doing at MEF to try to address those sorts of concerns. Last year here at this event, we had a closed-door session where we kicked off a working group looking at exactly that, trusted in messaging. And maybe Ellie will walk us through a bit. And I think we have a slide that kind of gives you an idea of what we've been addressing. So,
good, thank you, Nick. And I think we should, all of us, congratulate Nick on managing the Trusted Messaging Working Group. It's officially the 1-year birthday, as you just mentioned.
Thank you.
Hip hip hooray, for he's a jolly good fellow, so we all know. But it's been a very exciting journey, and I think Push, as you've highlighted, not just from the view from Meta, but if you look at the recent industry report from Nick Lane, I think it's his 4th mention today already, in a Mobile Squared report, which XConnect helped commissioned earlier this month, which identified, and I think as we all know, but it kind of put it down into clear, explicit percentage terms of the loss of trust that we are beginning to see in the SMS channel. And this is really impacting the entire industry. We're beginning to see the first either actual declines or predicted declines, a bit of both in reality. And this has been driven by a loss of trust. And hence, trust, as Dario mentioned before, is core to the MEF message, is core to the MEF DNA. And our goal really is to make sure that we can restore trust. As somebody famous once said, trust arrives on foot, but it leaves by horse. Our job to try to restore trust is a tough one. So the work that's been going on for the last year has really been driven by a good sub-working group within the MEF to help organize, look at in a way, the best practices that kind of exist around the world today. You've got activities taking place in the USA via TCR, you've got activities taking place in the UK with the MEF Sender ID registry, you've got the blockchain model that's being used in India, and these are all there to address one aspect of the trust model, which is to ensure that the identity and that smishing, false identity, spoofing, that whole world can all be addressed in a structured way. So the group has been meeting on a fairly regular basis, and at the moment now, these are the 12, 15 components that have been identified, And we're now working kind of through each of these bits and identifying what are the best practice, best architectures that can come out with a sensible framework and components for how to deal with what I like to call a multinational approach. So you'll have a national-based kind of registry structure, and this will allow for the brand identity and the ability for a Barclays Bank to be able to, with confidence, send a message to their customer, or in fact, at some point, make a call to their customer, and it will be identified as Barclays Bank in a trusted, secure manner. So these are the works that we're doing. This has been done as a multinational with the MEF kind of providing a framework and a governance structure, how that could work as well. So that's where we're up to. I think we're making good progress. The clock is ticking. The clock is definitely ticking, and hopefully we will be able to come out with some definitive best practices and models within the next sort of 3 to 6 months.
Thanks. So Push has talked about what Meta's concerns are and broadly what the sort of enterprise brand side of things are worried about. Ellie, you've told us a bit about what we're trying to do to address this crisis of trust. But Ira, tell me, who's to blame for this? Why are we in this situation to begin with?
Okay, I'm going to be brutally frank. Some people know that I'm brutally frank. Everybody in this room is to blame. We're all to blame. Because this is not something that just happened yesterday. When I raised my hand about a year and a half ago and said MEF needs to do something about this, is because we already saw this loss of trust. One of the most amazing figures that came out of Nick Lane's report, this is the 5th mention today, one of the things that I was struck by is that there's a feeling that it's just going to continue to grow, this lack of trust, so like 3.5% per year. So it's not, we in this room are feeling the lack of trust. Our customers are feeling the lack of trust. These are the biggest customers. And so we have to do something about it. But if we look at the blame, I think that we need to look not at the who, but at the why. And I've spoken about this in a couple of places. There's no coincidences. The fact that COVID happened, and then all of a sudden there were all these exclusive contracts, and the exclusive contracts led to the price changing, which led to the AIT because they had to meet their commitments, which led to this huge growth of phishing. There's no coincidence that when they spoke about this in the previous panel, this big difference between international and local termination, there's no coincidence that this is exactly what happened. Because if someone can make an easy buck somewhere, I want to make an easy buck, we all want to make it, they'll look for an easy buck, and this is an easy buck. So we're all there. We all created this possibility. We allowed this to happen because, let's also be very frank, everybody in the room, the telecom industry has made a lot of money from fraud over the years. Everybody makes money from it. From spam calls, from spam messages, we all make money from it. It pays for this beautiful room. It pays for our flights everywhere. MEF didn't build this room, did they?
No.
That's fairly provocative, I think. Yeah.
But we have to be frank with ourselves.
Yeah.
And therefore, there are some people within the industry who may not really want to get rid of all of that business coming in. And we have to be brutally frank. Now, the difference between AIT and smishing is that AIT is something that was created within the industry. The industry it's a malady that was inflicted by the industry upon itself. Everybody knows that self-policing in the telecom industry is a really difficult thing to do, which is why AIT is going to keep growing. But smishing is something that outside actors come in. We as a telecom industry actually have the ability to stop it, to make sure it doesn't happen. I also last year at the founding conference of the Trust, we mentioned that 25 years ago, everyone started buying things on the internet, and then everyone stopped buying things on the internet because credit cards were being stolen. All this fraud was happening for purchases on. The internet community came together and said, we have to stop this. And they created something called HTTPS, which is basically a secure layer which runs on the internet layer. And all of our purchases today on the internet, and how much money is being sold on the internet, you know these figures better than I do. Lots of billions and billions and billions of dollars. And we wouldn't do it if we didn't have that level of trust in that platform. What we need to do in this industry is to create that same layer of trust on top of the messaging telecom infrastructure. It works for voice, it works for messaging, it works for RCS. That lack of trust in SMS is not just a lack of trust in SMS, it's a lack of trust in the indigenous messaging of the telecom industry. And that lack of trust is going to carry over to RCS, which we all see as the future of this industry, if we don't put a stop to it.
Did you have a comment?
Well, if you're going to be provocative, then let's kind of really go head on, full on. And I think I was about 7 out of 10 on the provocative scale. Let's try to move that up a notch or two. So I think, as we've heard, there's two real aspects that are kind of driving and really Push kind of highlighted both of them. One is from the kind of commercial perspective, in terms of termination rates. You mentioned very clearly about waking up in the morning and yet another mobile network operator has increased the SMS termination rate by X factor. I'm now going to quote Nick Lane, oh my God, for the 6th time today. And the report shows that average SMS termination rates over the past 2 years have doubled. Doubled. Right? That is a substantial, the percentage of countries which have now got SMS termination rates above 10 cents, I think has tripled, and that's, I think, just in the past year alone. All of this is driving, once you start having these levels of termination rates, all this is driving kind of the fraud, the AIT, the AGT, because that's kind of the underlying power that's driving it. And in a way, it's a bit of a challenge for us as an industry because it's almost like heroin, right? You enjoy that rush, right?
How
you
would you
enjoy.
know, Ellie?
Personally, not for now. Me and a certain prince, not for now. I can't disclose that. Not in my book, anyway. But it is like a heroin rush, right? We kind of enjoy that revenue as it's going. The mobile network operators enjoy that revenue as it's kind of flooding in. But ultimately, that is kind of poisoning us as an industry, right? And when you look again at those percentages of termination rates and how that kind of drives and fuels the AIT and the underlying fraud, that is really impacting us. And the problem is, it's very hard to disassociate yourself from a heroin rush. It requires a lot of self-control, which as an industry, and I'm not necessarily saying this is limited to the messaging industry, in its heyday, likewise on the voice side, kind of everybody was enjoying it as well. So I'm going to be provocative on the 9.5 out of 10 scale. Possibly the only way that this is going to be addressed is via 6-letter word, which we don't really like to mention in public, which is regulation. It's more than 6 letters, I think it's 8 letters.
We're not counting.
Yeah, so regulation. What do I mean by regulation? Like in the voice industry is essentially at the national level, not international, at the national level, is a regulated industry. The national domestic regulator identifies what is the true cost of delivering a voice call and a whole load of economic models, how that's all kind of built. And then at that point, you as a regulated industry can charge what's called a cost-plus model. Obviously, you can make profit. You're there to make profit. That's fine. But you can't start gouging the market. You can't start kind of exploiting that opportunity. And we're already seeing, we've already felt at the messaging group, we've had some insights. I've seen myself certain letters, non-public letters written by 1 or 2 regulators who are beginning to be concerned about the price increases that they're seeing. This is, again, at domestic regulator level. And at some point, the warning will be that if this continues to happen, then we're going to have to take action and start including messaging in the regulated world. From having spent too many years of my life on the voice world, I don't think we as an industry want to be jumping down that route. I think we want to be doing everything we can, I wouldn't say to avoid it, but to be able to kind of do the necessary actions to kind of help us down a sensible path. And I suspect that kind of threat stroke reality might at some point start impacting on termination rates, bringing them back down to what should be a sensible rate, and that will allow the whole industry to flourish yet again and see the growth that we are all looking for.
Thanks. Push, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you up the scale to 11?
I think, no, I think what the industry really needs to do is, I think, reset itself and like go back to 5 years where it was. I think go back 5 years where the pricing were. I think there might be an odd market in those days, but I think pricing was sensible for companies like, and again, for the ecosystem, it was easy for them to design the products basis, hey, this is how we're going to authenticate users and stuff. So I think a reset is must. I don't want to get into lines of regulation and stuff because it takes its own time. I think we are at a stage where it's a tipping point now, right? Like people are seeing for alternatives. As a company, we are like reducing volume across because there's no way we can afford to pay this. So I think reset is probably, and that too 5 years back, is something where everything should start scratch from. Then you want to get into regulations and all this stuff, which is something as a company or individually personally, I'm not like in favor of it because it takes its own time. I haven't seen a regulation being made in 2 years, but I think going to a starting point, I think can be a good thing for the ecosystem. Everything thrives, things go back to normal. We have also seen that when the prices are optimal, and there's so many countries where pricing are still like less than a cent or 2 cents or something, and we don't see that much fraud there. Because arbitrage plays not there, right?
Provocative?
Oh, I can't stop you from being that. Yeah.
Meta used to be called Facebook, I remember. So if we roll back 5 years, then we were all using Facebook a lot more than
I'm sure you do, but I think kids
A
are
lot
moved
more
to
than we're
Instagram
using
and
it.
everything. But
Right.
yeah, you can continue to use
Right.
that. Yeah.
We were all using WhatsApp. That was so. I heard a couple of things now that really scare me. Regulation scares me.
Yeah.
Because regulation means that there are how many countries that have SMS today? 195 countries or whatever. There'll be 190 different regulations that we need to follow. And that, it's impossible in the international market to be able to follow that. We're already confused with regulation that we need to follow in every other country, and our teams that need to learn all these regulations. But think then of our customers, a customer who says, first of all, your prices go up every half a year, they double, and then on top of it, for this country, I need to put in this word, and for this country, I need to put in that word, and this needs to have a stop, and that needs to have a help. It's impossible. It's impossible. And one of the reasons why the clock is ticking is because if we don't step in and make some sort of a combined solution that we propose to the regulator, here's what we figured out, this is the best way to do it, then the regulator comes up with solutions that we can't possibly meet. And that fragmentation will kill this market. That'll be the last nail in the coffin.
So I think if we were to summarize that by saying reset, not regulation, I'm completely comfortable with that.
Right.
Regulation absolutely is kind of the sword that's hanging over our heads. We don't want to go down that road, but a reset concept makes a lot more sense.
But Ellie, you know, we as the religious ones on this panel, we know the famous vice called greed. And once you find out where the money is, it's hard to, oh no, I don't want that money. I want to go back to I was making a lot less 5 years ago. None of us would do that, right? It's going to be really difficult to do that because someone's found an easy pot at the end of the rainbow. Let's bring that one in. How do you reset that? How do you get people to say, hey, you don't want to be making all this money, make less money for a while just so that we can clean things up? I find that really, really hard to do.
It is inevitable the industry has to do that. For the industry to survive and the industry to succeed, we have to make sure that we are doing, say, the reset approach, or we're going to get the regulatory approach one way or another, right? We have to revert the pricings back to where they were, and that once that starts happening, fraud will start reducing, the volume growth will start increasing, and things will go back. So I think it's a hard lesson for us as an industry to learn. It's something that we do have to, and it's not just us, it's working together with the mobile industries. And yes, just going back to your macro point about the regulator. So one of the driving points behind the whole concept of trusted messaging is a recognition that if we look around the world today, more and more regulators, not necessarily from pricing perspective, but actually just from a trust perspective, are beginning to get involved in the messaging industry. And again, this is the first time that the regulators are kind of looking at the messaging industry. Till now, they've kind of looked at, it's been not part of the regulatory basket, and their concern has been all around voice. What we're seeing happening just in the past year is more and more national regulatory authorities, including whether it's the FCC in the States, whether it's Ofcom in the UK, whether it's the regulator here in Spain, who just last week issued a consultation. All of those regulators, as well as many others, for the first time, are saying, what do we need to do to the messaging industry, not the voice industry, to the messaging industry, to ensure that the trust and the smishing and the fraud is kind of contained and reduced. And yes, as an industry, we know that 220 or 194 regulators around the world driving down an individual path is not going to help us and not going to help global brands like Meta and others to try to produce we want to communicate with our customers on a global basis, not having to start working out 194 different sets of individual regulations. So one of the whole concepts behind the Trusted Messaging Working Group is to recognize that it needs this, what I call this, a multinational approach. Recognize that each country is going to have its own nuances, but you want to try and provide as much harmonization, as much standardization, as much globalization as you can, in order to ensure that we can, on one hand, recognize the local concerns, but come with a structured framework that will deliver this on a global basis. So I think we really need to make sure that we are working in anticipation of where the regulation is going, whether that's on pricing or whether that's on fraud and identity and security. We need to be ahead of that curve, because if we're not ahead of that curve, then we're going to be at the receiving end of regulation, which is unlikely to be good for the industry.
Unlikely.
Yeah.
So look, we have about 5 minutes left. To summarize and to end this on a positive note, maybe we can have, from each of you, one key step, like an immediate thing we could do in the next year to begin that journey to restore trust in SMS. I'll start with you, Push.
I think I would say reset the price. I think fraud is a concern. Can we do something on the fraud part of the things? We as a company, I started working with telcos directly in many cases, how can we prevent it, right? And we have been pretty open about hey, these are the logs we see, this is what we see. So I think that's moving, but I think if industry as a whole gets together and sorts that out, that's good for the ecosystem. Will we be able to solve everything ourselves? Not largely, but I think we can do an effort which we can. And I think once we learn from it, we are also happy to share, hey, this is what we learned and stuff, and contribute to the work which folks over here are doing. But I think price reset is something which is pretty important at this point of time. Otherwise, volumes will keep going down. People will find different ways to authenticate users and stuff. And that's not right as a direction for the industry, because I think it largely takes a lot away from the industry. So I think, yeah, that's from it.
Thanks.
And I look forward to work with you guys, our team stuff, how we can build up a better ecosystem as we move on, which is fighting and going on.
Excellent. Ira, anything to add?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I actually, you asked for one, I'll give three.
Okay.
The solution is we have to know who the sender is. We have to monitor how the message is being sent to make sure that it's not hijacked along the way. And then we have to deal with decrypting and determination. So there's three parts to it. What we're doing in the working group is working on all three parts, looking at also the ancillary parts of all of that. If we come with a solution, the three of us on the working group, we come up, we write it all down, we say, okay, this is what we recommend to Meta to do. Okay, this will make sure there's no phishing of Meta accounts. We'll not 100%, it'll be 95%, 97%. Would that be something that Meta would be willing to try? If we came up with an industry-led solution and that we would get regular NRA, that's National Regulatory Authority, not the National Rifle Association, I just need to be clear. Because I was already...
Yeah.
We're not making any comparisons
no
between
comparison
the two
at all.
whatsoever.
If we come with a rifle, you accept the solution. Yeah. So, no NRAs. If the NRAs, we say, okay, we got the big NRAs to buy into it, they want to see how it does, would you be willing to do the pilot for that sort of a solution?
We would love to look at it, how it looks like, yeah.
You heard that here, guys.
There you go.
Cameras?
It's filmed. Ellie, I'll give you the last word.
So I think it's a tricky one. I think one way to look at this is as follows. What's going on the voice side, what's going on the SMS side we've seen, unfortunately, likewise on the voice side, possibly to a much worse stage, right? The percentage of calls which are answered, like in the USA, from a fixed line, you can just assume it's going to be a spam robocall, and it's just ignored, and the percentage of answered calls, ASRs, are kind of dropping year on year. There are significant efforts going on in the voice side. Dario, am I allowed to briefly mention i3 Forum? 1 second. So there are some efforts going on the voice side, and maybe there's opportunities to see how that can be joined and combined from the messaging side. There are efforts going on the voice side. There's an initiative launched by the GLF, by the GSMA, by the i3 Forum called One Consortium, which is all looking to address restoring trust on the voice side. That's very nice. That's very helpful on the voice side. It's essential. The same headaches, NRAs around the world, all coming out with stir shaken yes, stir shaken no, this being sued over here, CLI blocking over here, is roaming, whole load of complexity, all happening on the voice side. And in a way, we are just trailing behind that. I think at some point being able to take the opportunities of restoring trust on the voice side and the efforts going on restoring trust on the messaging side, which means engaging both with the industry and with the regulators, recognizing what their concerns are, and making sure we are proactive on that side, having a combined opportunity to be able to take this forward, generically restore trust in communications. I, as Barclays Bank, want to be able to communicate with my customers, whether by messaging or by voice, with confidence, with trust. Here's my CLI, here's my logo, go forward. This is what the holy grail I think that we need to be working towards. And I think the efforts by the MEF and Dario's recognition beginning of last year of saying that we need to have a closed working group session last year, and this started off the whole trusted messaging side, is a proper good step forward in the right direction. Combine that at the right time and the right opportunity on the voice side, and we can have a good, generic, restore trust in communications going forward.
Thank you very much. Look, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Just curious if anybody wants that. Oh, yeah.
They're in shock.
Oh, over there.
Hi, Igor Skutsinia, Lang Telecom. We obviously probably don't want to look forward to the G-men showing up and saying, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And obviously this is a possibility, but still, and MEF being a voluntary organization cannot really bestow one-way control on the things that operators do. However, there's kind of structures that are forming, at least in the European Union, where the operators, usually they form like an RCS working group that would ensure that, hey, we're doing the RCS this way in this particular EU country. I know at least of 3 that are going on. And they are trying to make sure that you interconnect to one RCS operator, you interconnect to them all, et cetera, et cetera. Would you say that a kind of a nice way of putting it, a cartel is that is not like the oil cartels that keep the prices artificially high, but the nice cartel that keeps the prices artificially low and makes sure that the members stay out of exclusive deals could be an option?
You and I think have spoken about this previously. We've seen efforts in the past for the telecom industry to self-police. There are probably 7,000 GSMA resolutions, things that were to self-police that are largely being ignored by a large part of the telecom community. The problem is that's a self-policing thing. When we talk about a solution to stop phishing, I don't see us as saying, okay, this is the imposed solution, but this is the recommended solution. This is the requirements that we set out, okay, that needs to be done in order to have an end-to-end solution. Here are the vendors who are supplying parts or all of this solution. Go and use these vendors. That would be we can't impose anything on this industry. There are too many vested interests all over the place. When an NRA, by the way, to stop the G-men, bring the rifle from the NRA, the other NRAs, and then you can stop the G-men. But we have to not get to that point. The point is not to get there, which is why, again, that clock is ticking. We can't have that happen. The picture that Ellie spoke about, this one and this one, the Spanish one last week, Singapore one a couple of months, everyone is doing this. And eventually they're going to sit there, hey, you know what, we sent them this. How come the telecom industry is still ignoring us and not finding a solution for this? And that's when the problem's going to happen. Again, HTTPS was not a regulatory imposed on anybody. The industry came, the internet industry came, and they created HTTPS to solve the solution. That's what we need to do. And then the regulatory was fine, because they were beginning to start being investigations about internet fraud when credit cards were being stolen on the internet. So they came with their own solution to solve it. That needs to be the direction that we take. If we wait for the G-men to knock down the door, we'll have to find another source of income, all of us, because we'll lose our business.
5 words: self-regulation or joint regulation actually can work. So if we can make that work, then we can look forward to that.
All right, thanks. On that note, I think time is up. Thank you so much, panel. Amazing. Thanks, everyone. And
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Nice meeting you. I'll see you soon.